Here we have a mason's mark. This mark here was lightly inscribed by the Anglo-Norman masons. This would have been a way for the master mason on site to check the standard of the work of the individual mason, but also was used as a system whereby finished work, completed work, was paid to each mason assigned this mark. What we also have as well are directional marks inscribed on the stone, the sandstone. Here we see an arrow. So basically what we're seeing here is a medieval version of flat packing, because these masons would have been illiterate. They were assigned which work to do, then they assembled it through a system of coding such as this here. This piece here is a quadrant of one of the church columns. So this is quite heavy, but sandstone was easy to work and quite soft when it came out of the quarries. What we also have sandstone used for is windows. Here we have a fragment of a sill, and also for the doors. Here we have a segment of the west doorway of the church, where the townspeople would have entered for church service. I think we have now 7 masons marks, so at least we knew there was at least 7 masons working on the site.
So what I want to show you just quickly here are some of the elements that went into the buildings of the friary. I'm just going to start quickly with this axe, which we found directly beneath the floor of the church, suggesting that it may have been used at the initial stages of cutting the wood for the roof beams. And you can see we've got a small selection of nails. There must have been thousands and thousands of nails in the building. We have some of the painted plaster that would have adorned the interior of the church and some of the other buildings, and you can see this piece has different colours, so we know that there were patterns, maybe simple lines. We have some of the slates from the roof, and you can see that the hole to take the nail had to be drilled straight through. God knows how many thousands and thousands of slates there were and how much work went into drilling those holes. And see here, we still have a nail in position. And you can see, like modern slates, you've got a nail that has a very broad head and a short shank to drive into the timbers for the roof. Then we can look at the other elements of the roof, because when you came to the ridge, what they did was use ceramic tiles to cover the join between the two slates. And these are some of those ceramic ridge tiles, as they're known. And at the opposite end, we have our floor tiles. Now, we have very few floor tiles, unfortunately. This is one that has a particular pattern. It's 14th century in date. It's what's called a line impressed tile. And because of the very good work of Eames and Fanning, we know that there's a catalogue that we can refer to. We see this pattern and we know it was used, for example, in the Dominican friary in Drogheda. This is a replica of a tile. People make replicas to try and get a sense of how they were done and what a floor of tiles would have looked like. And lastly, we have the elements that would have gone into the buildings themselves. This is a lead ventilator grill. So you can imagine you've got your nice thick stone wall. You don't want to have too many windows, but you do want air circulating. So you insert these little, very decorative pieces of lead at intervals. And so you get a flow of air, and you also have something nice to look at. We have a key from a door You had to have doors in the building. And lastly, there's this lovely piece of decorated stone. It's probably Dundry, an imported stone. There's a tiny little cross incised there, which would have given the mason his guidelines for creating the pattern. And this may well have been from a tomb inside in the church. So those are elements of the building.
The use of imported stone at the Blackfriary continued with the importation of worked pieces of Purbeck Marble, which created an ornate, open and impressive cloister arcade. It was also used for internal tombs. Quarried out of the Purbeck quarries in Dorset in England, this would have been ordered by the master mason on site, probably under the influence of de Jonville, the patron, who would have had a preference for this type of stone. Shipped over, the cloister or arcade is of this bluish grey marble. We call it a marble, technically it's a limestone, polished up. We then have the columns. This column fragment here, you can see it's chamfered around the edge to slot into the capital. In the center here, we have a punch mark, but this is probably for a lathe to work the stone. The cloister wall then, the sill stones, the capitals and bases, and the columns then supported these magnificent Purbeck marble arches. These magnificent cloister arcade arches have a moulding that was very popular with the Anglo-Norman masons in the late 13th century into the early 14th century. Purbeck marble was an unusual medieval industry because the marblers in Purbeck itself worked the stone in situ in Dorset. All the other work you see here would have been worked on site at the Blackfriary in Tring. So we're lucky these actually survived. Purbeck is a beautiful stone, but it's not very strong. So when the cloister collapsed, the stone itself broke. So we're lucky to have these pieces.
We found an enormous amount of stained glass at this site, a really astonishing amount, but we've also found glass still in its lead cames. A lead came is the strip of lead where the glass could sit in and be held to make the shape in the window. This is really an unusual find for Ireland. There isn't a parallel for actually finding it still in the lead, because the lead was the recyclable material and people wanted the lead, so they simply smashed out the glass, which is horrible to think about. But you can see here that we still have some indication of the kind of shapes that were created by these lead cames and that the pieces of glass were cut to fit into. And they had already been painted with these designs of little circles and the cross hatching, and this is typical grisaille glass, which is 13th century in date. Josephine Moran has published the glass from a number of places, and she has been attempting to reconstruct patterns, and some of ours fit into the kind of patterns that she was describing. And you can see here in this one and these two pieces how they've been cut to have circular or slightly lobed shapes to them to fit into some pattern within an overall window. These would have been probably non-figurative pieces, but they might have bordered pieces in the windows that would have had painted figures on them. We don't have glass yet that we can definitively say shows figures, and that may well be because people wanted those panels for their houses or somewhere else, and what was left to be smashed up on the friary was the border pieces of the grisaille glass. We also have 15th century glass, so we know that windows were replaced at some stage or another, and that might even have coincided with the framing of the window being replaced and changed. The quantity of glass is enormous, and we're really lucky that Cardiff University have kindly undertaken, as part of their training students in conservation, to do this conservation work, and we'll hear from them in another video.